morning, everyone. So good to see you all today. We will go ahead and jump right into the coffee hour. And so today we are joined by Les Owen, Conservation Division Director at the Colorado Department of Agriculture. And Les will be giving us an update on the status of the gray wolf introduction and any of the latest developments going along with that reintroduction. And so Les said he's happy to answer questions during the presentation. So if any of those come up, feel free to drop those in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to get to those while we go. And then, of course, we'll save time for a Q&A at the end. And so thank you all for coming today, and a big thank you for Les too. And so I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Les.
All right. Well, I did the dry run of sharing my screen. We'll see if it works the second time. All right. There we go. I'm hoping everybody sees that. And I know I'm supposed to click something else to make it go to slideshow. There we go. Good morning. A lot of unknowns with how to run a Zoom meeting. There's many unknowns with the wolf reintroduction efforts that are going on in Colorado. So I guess that's a good segue to jumping into that. But good morning, everyone. Again, Les Owen here. Happy to spend some time with y'all this morning and talk about the kind of where things stand with wolf reintroduction in Colorado. It's been a long process to get to where we're at, and as Kayla said, if anybody has any questions, y'all want some clarification on anything as I'm going through this, just drop a deal in the chat or raise your hand or get my attention, and we'll take a look at it. But just a little background as to how we got to where we are right now. Prop 114, passed by a very thin margin back a couple of years ago, and that codified in statute in the CPW's section of the statute that the state shall reintroduce wolves. Some of the other pieces of the proposition that were codified is that there would be a rather robust and stakeholder input process, and that wolves would be reintroduced somewhere west of the Continental Divide on designated lands. That was a interesting choice of words. Some of the original version of Prop 114 said public lands west of the Continental Divide, and it was a strategic change by the proponents to change it to designated lands. As many of you know, to reintroduce on public lands, be it BLM or U.S. Forest Service, would have required an additional NEPA analysis. So that was a very strategic change that kind of took a step around, but that limits it to only willing private landowners or state-owned lands west of the Continental Divide that are eligible to have a reintroduction. Another requirement of the proposition was that a depredation compensation plan be included with wolf management. So there was a very extensive public engagement. I know many of y'all were involved. There were meetings held around the state. There was the technical work group and stakeholder advisory group, or TWIG and SAG as they were named, that met over about a year and a half. Wayne East from the Animal Health Division here at the Department of Ag was on the technical work group, and I sat on the stakeholder advisory group as the representative of CDA, along with a diverse group of other folks on there. It was had all viewpoints, all perspectives were present and accounted for in all those meetings, which made for some very interesting meetings. Good discussions. There was, I guess when nobody got exactly what they wanted, and that's what compromise sometimes looks like. So it was a very long process, run pretty well. I moved to Colorado from New Mexico 7 years ago, and I was in a similar position with the New Mexico Department of Agriculture and worked with the Mexican wolf program down there as well. And there was no meaningful engagement or involvement of the Department of Ag and Ag stakeholders in Mexican wolf management. And this was meaningful involvement in Colorado. So that's you get over the kick in the teeth of how this reality of wolf reintroduction came to be in Colorado, and just look at the process. The process has been done pretty well. My hat's off to CPW for taking what they were given a thou shalt do, and they've done a pretty good job of coming up with a state management plan. Why is it beeping at me? Is there a question?
That was just someone joining. We're good.
Okay. If there's a question or something, I don't think I can see that part. Just let me know, and we'll address it at the time. But so now, the state process happened, and I don't know if y'all remember during, I think it was the February after the proposition passed, there was a court decision. When the proposition was voted on, wolves were delisted, and shortly thereafter, through court decisions, wolves became relisted, and I'm talking about listed federally under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So that's where we are now. The complication of what is a wolf, what is it considered in the United States? This map kind of shows that there's Colorado kind of in the middle, that kind of dark gray area north of us, which is Wyoming and Idaho and Montana and a little bit of Oregon and Washington. That's called the Northern Rocky Mountains population. Those wolves in that geographic area are not listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. They were delisted there, so they are state managed wolves. Over in Minnesota, there's a threatened population of wolves there, and then that the black area down south of I-40 in New Mexico and Arizona is the 10J, or experimental non-essential population boundary for the Mexican gray wolf, which the Mexican gray wolf was listed as a distinct subspecies. So which kind of complicates things even further. They're not supposed to be able to mix with the northern gray wolves because they're a different subspecies. And that's a whole nother issue that this brings in. There's a lot of kind of nuanced problems, but so why does it matter? In the Section 9 of the Endangered Species Act, the Federal Endangered Species Act prohibits take. And take can mean anything from, of course, killing, trap, capture, harm is included in that definition. And then the regulatory definition of harm is basically anything that upsets the life cycle of the critter. So it's very, very broad prohibitions under Section 9. And Section 10 is the section of the Endangered Species Act that allows for exemptions to Section 9, to the take. And so that's what's important currently, because that's what we're trying to get in Colorado as a 10J, or experimental non-essential population designation for the wolves in Colorado. This allowed the Secretary of Interior can authorize the release and related transportation. That's one thing that a 10J rule does, of an endangered species within this designated area. There are some requirements. It has to be completely separate geographically from existing populations. And that is a very important distinction that I'll come back to here in another slide or two. But that is currently, well, we're kind of in the middle of the process right now for this 10J, or experimental non-essential population rule. And saying I can never get that thing. There we go. So right now we are in that process, and I'm kind of moved away from the state rule, because at this point the state rule, with the exception of the depredation compensation program, is a state rule that is trumped by federal law. Since the wolf in Colorado is currently considered a federally endangered species, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has management authority, and the state plan cannot authorize anything that the Endangered Species Act prohibits. And that's why we're here now, trying to get this 10J rule. Well, the 10J rule is considered a major federal action, so it triggers NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and they're doing an environmental impact statement. So part of the EIS is, what are they doing? Why do they need it? Of course, management flexibility is the need for this. There really is no management flexibility when it comes to managing wolves. We see that currently going on in North Park. The handful of wolves that pack that had established up there in the north central part of the state has, the options for dealing with them have been extremely limited. Basically, human presence to try and move them off. They put up flattery, different things like that. Even things such as rubber bullets, those are not allowed currently because they're could potentially injure a wolf, so they're prohibited by the Endangered Species Act. So there is a need for this management flexibility, and this 10J rule spells out what flexibility and management it would be allowed. And so under NEPA, they have to look at a variety of alternatives. One that's required is the no action alternative. And so the EIS looked at the impacts of reintroducing wolves without a 10J rule. So that would mean releasing wolves in Colorado that are fully endangered and cannot be managed. And that would certainly have some problems that are associated with it. More areas like North Park, I guess would be the best way to describe it. Alternative one, which is their proposed action, is a 10J rule that covers the entire state of Colorado, border to border. This is the most desirable because if a wolf is in Colorado, it would be considered experimental, non-essential, regardless of where it came from. If it were inside the state boundaries, it would be covered by this 10J rule. Now, alternative two that they look at is an interesting one, and they were kind of required to look at it. Remember I said that an experimental population has to be wholly separate geographically from existing populations. Well, so if there is an existing population, it cannot be part of the 10J rule. And this gets into kind of the implementation of this by U.S. Fish and Wildlife over the years has relied on the rule of 2, 2, and 2, which means 2 or more breeding pairs that have 2 or more pups for 2 consecutive years. That constitutes an existing population. If that were to occur, then an area, and say, for example, if you look on this map that's here on the presentation, that little orange outline up in the northern part of the state there, if, for example, they discovered that the pack up there had met this 2 for 2, 2, 2, and 2 threshold, then that area would have to be excluded from the 10J rule area. Thus, wolves in that area would continue to be managed as fully endangered and would not be afforded the management flexibility by the 10J rule. Why this is important, there's been sightings of wolves all around Colorado for years. Unconfirmed sightings, take it for what it is. If U.S. Fish and Wildlife were to find evidence that there have been 2 or more breeding pairs that had 2 more pups for 2 consecutive years, that area would be, this is prior to the formal adoption of this statewide 10J rule, that area would be excluded from the 10J rule, and that management flexibility wouldn't be there. I don't think there's much worry of this. The North Park pack did not reproduce this year, so they would have to go another 2 years. The way I understand it, and this I think there's only 2 wolves left. One's Papa and one's one of the sons, I think. So there's probably not any reproduction going on there. So it is a concern, but it's very unlikely that this would happen prior to the 10J rule being implemented, which is where we're wanting to be. That is the goal. But it is a real thing. It is a real thing. So this process is ongoing right now. The environmental impact statement analysis is going on by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They were taking comments until, gosh, when was it? April or May of this year. In fact, the Department of Ag Work, cooperating agency, is some conservation districts. I know Rio Blanco and White River are a cooperating agency on this effort as well. And I think they just sent out an email the past day or two. There's a meeting scheduled for, I believe it's next week, or maybe 2 weeks from in the next couple of weeks, to kind of give an update to the cooperating agencies where things are at with this and what they're expecting. So what are they expecting? This is you can see the schedule on the right hand side of what they're wanting to do. Basically, they want to have the EIS finalized and a record of decision signed by late fall. And this is to meet the, basically the deadline that Prop 114 put, that which was to try and get a plan in place to get wolves released in Colorado by the end of 2023. So that is the current plan. But so let's go through some of the specifics of the 10J. And these are, comments were submitted from, the state of Colorado. I know many of y'all submitted comments, a lot, many stakeholders, thousands and thousands of comments. And that's what they're going through now. These are some of the things that they asked about, which, one, the proposed geographic boundary, the most beneficial for management flexibility is the full state of Colorado. Anytime that there's an Endangered Species Act rule out for comment, they ask for, biological data relating to the conservation status of whatever critter it is, in this case, gray wolves, adequacy of the proposed regulations for the non-essential population. And we'll get into some of the specifics in the next few slides, some things that we were able to comment on, some problems with the rule that needed to be fixed. And any additional management flexibilities. And this last one was interesting, and that was whether or not to allow lethal management of gray wolves that are having a significant impact on ungulate populations. They didn't actually include that in the text of the proposed rule, but they did analyze it in the NEPA document, so they can include it in the final version. It will be interesting to see whether or not that shows up in the final version, but another one of those kind of unknown things. So the key provisions of the rule, first of all, it would designate a non-essential experimental population. There is such thing under Section 10J as an essential experimental population, which maintains more protections and less management flexibility. That U.S. Fish and Wildlife has never used the essential experimental population because it's kind of pointless. It doesn't really provide management flexibility, which is kind of the idea. So definitions are key in these types of rules, and I'm going to go through a handful of those. This first one is interesting. Domestic animals, animals that have been bred. What's interesting about this is it includes pets. If the Colorado wolf plan, the one written by CPW, does not include pets as protected animals. So under the idea of if something's in the act of killing a domestic animal, which is what this says, it would allow take. The state plan would not allow that. For if something was in the act of attacking a pet, it would not allow for take of the critter, just for the attack of this. The state plan basically includes livestock and working dogs. So that's an important distinction between the two. We'll see what the federal, they could change that in their final one. We'll see what it looks like. The state rule can be more restrictive than the federal rule, but not less so. So this next definition, in the act of attacking, this one, the actual biting, teeth on, or harassing by wolves that would indicate to a reasonable person that such biting is likely to occur at any moment. That is a more broad definition. It's usually been teeth on that required, proof that there was actually a bite happened on the animal before they were in the act of attacking in other 10J rules. And this one actually allows that, if a reasonable person believes that they're fixing to bite, the act of attacking has started. This is, I think, a much more beneficial definition. Then, of course, it defines how broadly as landowners interpreted livestock. Livestock producer was something that had a problematic piece, I thought. Any person that is actively engaged in farming or ranching and that receives a substantial amount of total income from production of livestock. Doesn't matter how much money they make what percentage of their income comes from livestock production. If they're producing livestock, they are a livestock producer. And the comments that were submitted by the state requested to have that piece in red removed. And going through this presentation, if it's red and underlined, it was something that I had an issue with and tried to address in the comments that we sent to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So that was one of them. This definition of private land is all land other than that under federal government ownership. That is problematic. I didn't underline the whole thing, but so that basically classifies state CPW, state wildlife area lands, state trust lands as private land. And that's confusing. That doesn't serve any purpose. They need to have a better definition of land tenure, call it what it is. This definition of problem wolves has two really big issues in it. Wolves that are confirmed to have attacked domestic animals on private land twice within a calendar year. It should not matter whether it's on private land, public land, state land, any land. If they attack animals, it should add to their problem wolf status. So we requested that on private land was removed, and twice within a calendar year, that doesn't make any sense. It should be, if it's twice within in a 12-month, the consecutive 12-month period, I think is what we asked for in there. But here you could have an instance where a wolf attacked someone on December 30th, and then again on January 1st, and it would not be considered two attacks within a calendar year, and they wouldn't achieve problem wolf status. And you'll see why problem wolf status is important here in a few slides. Other definitions, they describe public land permittees, and this one's actually more broad. It's not just grazing permittees. They expand this definition to outfitters and guiding businesses. So it a nice broad one. They attempt to describe wounded, which can become important for investigations. Now, this is some key provisions of the rule is when they allow take. So take is allowed without a permit, and I put an asterisk there because per the federal rule, it would be without a permit. The State Endangered Species Act requires a permit for take of any state listed species, which the wolf is and will still be a state listed species. So a permit from CPW would be required, whereas one from the federal government would not be. And that's where this thing starts to get confusing, is you've got the Federal Endangered Species Act as well as the State Endangered Species Act, and they don't always line up exactly. But so in specific circumstances, opportunistic harassment, that's just basically hazing wolves off. Do it at any time. There's a reporting requirement. Intentional harassment by a landowner or permittee, so a livestock owner, where it can be kind of the more potentially injurious types of harassment, like rubber bullets and those types of things, after confirmed wolf activity in an area. And now it comes to when is take allowed, and this is lethal take by a landowner on their private land. That their qualifier is a huge problem in this rule. It doesn't matter, that would mean that only on deeded acres that are deeded to the actual landowner would this apply. If they've leased other private land from somebody else, if they have a state land board lease, their federal grade, this limits it to only their personal deeded acres, and the request was made to take their qualifier out, just or take by landowners on private land. And this is taking the act of attacking, and that's where that definition comes into play. For act of attacking, it doesn't necessarily have to mean teeth on. So they can take a wolf. There's a shoot on sight authorization for if there's problem wolves. So this taking the act of, you can shoot one if they're in the act of it per this rule. To A shoot on sight authorization refers to if there are wolves that have been designated problem wolves, they can be shot on sight without livestock even being in the area. So that's where the importance of that problem wolf definition comes into play. Further, more provisions that are allowing the take by a livestock producer, and this is specific to federal grazing allotments. Take, in the end, it's pretty much the same. It's take in the act of attacking livestock or dogs, but it has a qualifier on the person's allotment or other area authorized for use. Well, that, to me, that's pretty problematic. There's, many of y'all know this very, very, very well on federal grazing allotments. There's a lot of recreation use out there. Gates get left open. There's many, many reasons why livestock may not be in the specific pasture allotment that they're supposed to be in. One could be that wolves have run them through a fence or other predators, different things like that. So that, that requirement that it's only on the specific allotment or authorized use area, I think is problematic. And we requested that they take that out of there. But this does, it allows the take of wolves on private or public land when they are in the act of attacking livestock. And this gives them management flexibility where livestock producers would be able to at least feel like they're able to protect their livestock. Some other, circumstances where take is allowed. Agency take, so folks that work for a CPW or Fish and Wildlife Service, the Wildlife Services, USDA, APHIS folks, all of those would be allowed to take wolves that are repeat depredators, take in defense of human life, in defense of human safety. All of those, those are allowed by both the federal and state Endangered Species Act. Incidental take. So this is one where it can get a little touchy. Take is allowed if the take is accidental or incidental to another otherwise lawful activity, and if reasonable due care was practices. So what they specifically say in there, that shooters have the responsibility to identify their targets, so that if someone says, I thought it was a coyote and shot it and it was a wolf, that is not allowed under this rule. That would be something that whoever did that would probably be prosecuted. So it's know your targets. Take for research purposes, CPW would have the ability to use take where they need to. There's different reporting requirements for each of these types of things. Prohibitions, monitoring, there's a lot of data collection that's required by CPW and reporting requirements back to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. All of those are, they're basically anytime any management action or anything is done to a wolf or seen by a wolf, it needs to be reported within a reasonable amount of time. And all of that will be evaluated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in an annual review. They signed a memorandum of agreement with CPW to implement this rule, and that's kind of how it would go into place. So we have this federal rule that, is lingering out there. Like I said, they're looking at the comments right now, and we'll be finalizing the environmental impact statement, and we'll be releasing a final rule and proposed decisions sometime in the fall. The hope is that the record of decision on that will be signed sometime in December prior to the state releasing wolves in Colorado. Now we're back to some pieces of the state plan. This picture on the right is they went through a habitat evaluation model that was done by a group of professors. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now, up at CSU, where they looked at different things like prey densities for ungulates, the whether or not there's livestock in the area, and there's not very good data on that. They did use, you know, federal grazing allotments and season of use, county livestock estimates, and those to try and look at areas where the, you know, the conflict risk would be lower because the model assumed that there was lower incidence of or fewer livestock in the area. Ecological suitability is basically based on where the elk and deer at, mainly the elk, because that is assumed to be their primary prey source. And so they came up with this model, and these were the key areas, as well as, you know, that had to be, I believe, 60 miles from a state boundary or a tribal boundary, and it had to be, you know, west of the Continental Divide there. The line, the squiggly line you can see going up and down there. So this was the area that the model picked as the best places for the wolves to be released in. This was based on winter habitat. Winter's the best time to capture wolves because, well, it's in the snow and they're easier to find. So that's kind of why it's any of those actions would be happening during the winter. The current plan is to release, you know, somewhere around 5 to 10 wolves in December, and that then we get into, you know, we get into, will it be done with or without the 10J rule, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. Some specific things about the plan. So there's a phased approach that was set up in the state plan, which it was formally adopted by the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission this May. But so phase 1 is when the wolves are considered state endangered. They're currently on the state endangered species list, and they'll remain there until such time as there's a minimum of 50 wolves in Colorado for 4 successive years. And once that threshold is met, they would be downlisted to state threatened, which would begin phase 2. Phase 2 would end, which means that wolves would come off of the state threatened and endangered species list if there's a minimum of 150 wolves for 2 consecutive years, or more than, you know, a minimum of 200 wolves with no temporal restrictions on that. If we get to 200 wolves after that initial 4 successive years, they would immediately be delisted. So just in seeing how wolf populations have grown in other states over the years, if we have 50 wolves for 4 successive years, the likelihood of being over 200 at the end of that 4 years, in my mind, is probably pretty high. My crystal ball, which doesn't work all that good, but with this one, based on what I've seen and what other folks have said about wolf population growth in areas, is that we'll basically go straight from phase 1 to phase 3. It'll meet the requirements of moving from phase 1 to 2 and phase 2 to 3 simultaneously after that four successive years of 50, meaning we'll be over 200 wolves at that time. That's my guess, but that is the state plan, and in each of those phases, there's some differences in allowable take of wolves. For take by livestock producers, it pretty much stays the same throughout phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, with the exception of permitting requirements. But the state did set it up where if there are wolves that are in the act of attacking your livestock, that you can take them. You can attempt to lethally remove them during each of the phases. So that, you know, it does give livestock producers the tool. Again, the federal rule has to be in place before this state plan can become effective, because the state does not have management authority over wolves currently, and this is required for them to do so. One part of the state wolf plan that doesn't rely on the federal rule is the depredation compensation package. And this one, you know, I've seen it in New Mexico. There was basically a confirmed kill compensation program that was relied on grant money from the wolf livestock demonstration grants from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. 100,000 a year is about all all there was. And so even though it was limited to confirmed kills, the money was already spoken for before it would ever even arrive. So it was trying to say it was a very underfunded compensation program, and it was limited only to confirmed kills. The compensation package that is rolled up in the Colorado wolf plan, in my opinion, is probably the best one in the nation currently. It gives some choices. Basically, if depredation is ongoing on an operation, producers can opt for either just applying a simple compensation ratio that would, and this is based on the science that shows that, especially in rougher country, you're not going to find all of the calves or sheep, or you're not going to find all the livestock that are taken. It's just too rough a country. And some science has shown that, as high as 7 or 8 to 1, basically for every one you find, there's 7 you don't find is what they're basing this compensation ratio on. And you'll note there's 2 there. There's a 7 to 1 or a 5 to 1, and those will apply based on whether or not it's determined that whatever ranch is being impacted is also employing non-lethal mitigation measures to try and dissuade the wolves from eating their livestock. That will be how that provision of it is implemented. Will be interesting. What qualifies as implementing non-lethal mitigation measures? That I think there's a lot of details on that are to be worked out. But if someone is implementing non-lethal measures, they can use the 7 to 1 ratio. Otherwise, it would be a 5 to 1. And there's also a 1.1 1.25 to 1 ratio for yearlings. So that's basically if you have 1 confirmed kill and you're missing, in your fall counts, you're missing another 7 calves, you'll get paid for 8 times the fair market value for that one, assuming that the others are lost. And it is capped, though. If you come to fall gather and bring in, and you're only missing 4 head, they're only going to compensate for those 4 head, and not the whole compensation ratio up to 7 to 1. A little bit of confusing there. So if anybody has any questions, please stop me. And then the other choice that folks have is itemized production losses. And this, the compensation ratio, Wyoming uses a 7 to 1 ratio. It's what's proposed here is very similar to what Wyoming does for the simple compensation ratio. But what other states haven't had to do is try to address the impact to production losses that chronic wolf presence causes on livestock herds. And that's just, how does it affect the performance, be it the reproduction performance, be it the just weight gain performance, just herd performance factors. And so this itemized production losses piece of this is meant to address that. And basically it would require good record keeping on an operation. They want basically 3 years of data pre-wolf to establish normal death loss. What is your normal percent death loss on a particular ranch? What is your normal weaning weights? What are your normal conception rates for establishing this baseline pre-wolf? And then if wolves become established and are chronically on your place, if you can show that there's a departure from this pre-wolf baseline in any of those, conception rates, weaning weights, death loss, if you can show that there's that you had a dip in herd performance because of, after the wolves got there, this program will pay for those losses based on that departure from the herd performance averages, the baseline that was set pre-wolf. So that no other state has really gone down the road of cracking this nut. Everybody's kind of tried to. It's a hard nut to crack, but at least Colorado's trying to do it, and I think that's extremely positive. Is this a perfect compensation package? No, there is no perfect compensation package. When it comes right down to it, if you're a ranch operation that has wolves on you, there is no compensation package that will make you whole, as in no wolves there. And that's just the nature of the beast. But this, in my opinion, I think the depredation compensation package that Colorado's put together is probably the best one in the nation. All that said, a good compensation package without money is pretty much meaningless. But during the legislature this year, Senate Bill 23-255 passed and was signed into law by the governor that provides $350,000 annually to a depredation compensation fund. So the state is, putting some money out there to help fund this thing. There's also a Born to be Wild license plate that, is another one of those special use license plates, I believe, would put $50 a year into a fund to help, fund the wolf program, to help pay for implementation of the non-lethal measures, which that piece doesn't have funding currently. It's separate from the depredation compensation fund. So those two pieces of legislation were passed this year, and will definitely be beneficial for the depredation compensation program. Because like I said, even if we don't have a 10J rule, this depredation compensation program, that one goes into effect. That one doesn't rely on the management flexibilities from the federal rules. So we have the compensation program. And then I know you're all aware, Senate Bill 256, which basically would have said that wolves would not be reintroduced in Colorado until the 10J rule was in place. And that one passed the legislature, but was vetoed. So that's kind of where things stand right now with wolf reintroduction in Colorado. It's clear as mud. There will be wolves released in December, with or without a 10J rule in place. And hopefully the 10J rule will be in place, I guess, is where I'll leave that, because we need that added management flexibility to keep from having wolves that are impacting folks and not being able to do something to change that behavior. When wolves can become habituated to humans, they can become habituated to eating livestock. And if you can't manage them, and including lethal management can be a big deterrent for the wolves that aren't shot, or at least shot at. They can learn. They're pretty smart critters, and they learn that that's not a behavior that's good for their livelihood. So I've been talking an awful lot, and I see we're getting somewhere close to the end. So I think I'll cut it off there, and hopefully there's some questions that I can try and answer.
Excellent. Thank you, Les. Do you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
And we'll open it up to any questions. That was a lot of information, but
that was a lot of information.
I'll turn on my video too. And so any questions from you all while we have Les here?
Questions or any comments? I see Callie's on here, or at least someone from White River and Douglas Creek. I wonder if y'all have any other takeaways from the cooperating agency process that Fish and Wildlife has laid out for us. I'm sure other folks would be interested from the district's perspective on that as well.
Hi, Les. Yes. Thank you. Very good job. I think you covered it all pretty darn well, and keeping it straight between the state and the feds. But I thought you did a very nice job of that. So good job. The cooperating agency thing, it's been interesting to say the least. But I think you were mentioning the date. I was looking it up while you were talking there. So we're supposed to get the chance to take a look at the meeting is on the 17th. And then I think we're supposed to have right at a week's time period to review it before I think that's all that we have for an opportunity to review it before it goes back for final. I shouldn't say final, but before their work on it to send it out. So it'll probably be a busy week. I will be hollering at you, trust me.
It'll probably be right on top of one of the other cooperating agency reviews that's going on this summer. But
it is the same week as matching grants are due. I do know that. But yeah, good job. Thank you.
No questions from anybody? Y'all are an easy crowd. Usually somebody gives me one that's a stumper and I'm like, I don't really know. I may have been
Quiet crowd this morning.
It's a heavy subject.
Mm.
No, Les, the only thing that I guess I would say, and my understanding after attending Cattleman's meeting and the CPW guys clarifying. So the question always comes up, or in my mind anyway, what happens if the 10J rule is not in place by the time they release wolves? I mean, is that the end? That's the end of the 10J rule conversation or not? What I was told, and correct me if this is your understanding or not, is because of the 2+2+2, just because they release wolves, let's say in December of this year, it's going to be at least 2 years before we would have a population, a legal definition of a population. So if the 10J rule then was to get finalized and in place anytime between the 1st of 24 and at least within 2 years, it would still go into effect, correct?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. It that is, as long as the state is below that 2x2x2. The thing that gnaws at me, that concerns me a little, is what if somebody finds a pack of wolves that haven't been documented before somewhere in the state, you know, at any time. Now I've seen, you know, people have showed me Facebook posts from down in the San Juan Mountains of a canid that is not a dog, it's not a coyote. Is it a wolf? Is it a dog-wolf hybrid? I don't know. It's not been confirmed. So there's unconfirmed sightings of wolves around Colorado. If some of those, you know, became confirmed and you know, they went and documented, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife went and documented and found evidence of this 2x2x2 having been met, it could be a problem much quicker than that. Yes. I honestly, the chances of that happening, I think, are very slim. So I think it's definitely accurate and likely that, you know, if wolves are reintroduced and they start breeding right away, it would be a minimum of 2 years before it would impact the 10J rule. And that, you know, we could still get a 10J rule. It would just exclude the area that those wolves are making a living at. And
right. So but as long as there isn't a population, a legal definition of a population, it is retroactive. And so any wolves, for instance, the North Park wolves and so forth, would still get covered under the 10J.
Correct.
Now, trust me, that yep, doesn't put my mind at ease a whole lot, but just a hair.
It does. It is helpful because that, you know, and I hear people ask questions that, well, you say we have the statewide 10J rule in place. What happens if a wolf from, you know, comes down from Yellowstone and comes into the state? Or what is their status? And once the 10J rule is in place, it doesn't matter where the wolf comes from. If they're within the state of Colorado, they are considered part of the experimental non-essential population and subject to those management requirements. The only place where it gets hairy is the Mexican gray wolves from the south, because they're listed as a distinct separate subspecies of gray wolf. So this 10J rule applies to gray wolves. It doesn't apply to Mexican gray wolves. So there's sure complications if the little Mexican wolves migrate north, which, you know, they have. They've been just recently they returned one from northern New Mexico back down, or yeah, I believe it was in northern New Mexico, maybe in Arizona, back down to the population area. So it yes, And you know, the opposite is true. If they immigrate out of Colorado, like say to Utah, as soon as they cross the line and go into Utah, they're fully endangered wolves. And that's why Utah is not very happy with this proposal to reintroduce wolves on their, you know, in a neighboring state. So clear as mud, the wolf thing is.
Excellent. Well, we do have a few more minutes. Any other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Emily with the Book Cliff, Mount Sopris, and Southside Conservation Districts. I just have a bit of a plug. Holy Cross Cattlemen's Association, our kind of local cattlemen's association, is putting together a meeting in October or September. Exact dates are not discussed. I think they're going to rent out the whole Garfield County Fairgrounds, the big indoor arena, and go over some mitigation measures. CPW will be involved. So it should be a good kind of preemptive, some mitigation, record keeping. CSU Extension is going to help out, kind of go over some things they can offer to help farmers and ranchers keep good records in case they do have issues and need the reimbursements, kind of what that'll look like. So I will, the more they get that hashed out, get that out to this group.
And that, yeah, thank you, Emily, for that. And I may say touch base once like more of those details are hashed out, like you said. We could share that in the scoop too and share information about that.
Yep. Yeah, I will get you guys info as us and Holy Cross get it figured out.
Excellent. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, I will give a plug. We won't have a coffee hour next week because most of the field staff, we will be at Camp Rocky, hanging out with all of them and helping out. So that should be a good time. But our next coffee hour will be August 2nd, same place, same time, 9 a.m. But we'll be joined by folks from CCDE, the Colorado Conservation Districts Employees Association, and they're going to be sharing information about their upcoming leadership program and how folks can apply and what to expect within that leadership program. So that should definitely be a good one for folks to tune into. But other than that, we will stop recording. And thank you, Les, for joining us today. And if there are any questions, feel free to send questions to Garth and I, and we could pass those along to the proper channels. So thanks all, and that's all we have for today.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Enjoyed it, and y'all know how to get a hold of me. So feel free to reach out anytime if you come up with any questions. In the meantime, thank you all for everything you do.
Great, thanks, Les. Have a good one, guys.